Popcorn rice after discussion.
Want to know some more fun facts?
Isn't it awesome to see some of your favorite content creators and favorite people, honestly, that you follow here on this app, be a part of this amazing community called the Nerd Initiative?
But yeah, I'd love to get, when we do these like profiles and these interviews, and I want to talk about Goldin, obviously. I want to get your story as well. So I'd love to get, obviously you introducing yourself, your position at Goldin, and how you found your way to it, because it's such a cool job for those that don't know. And you're head of basically comic auctions and acquisitions. I probably completely butchered your title, so I'm going to let you take it off with what you do at the auction house. But it just seems like incredibly fun, and I can't wait to dig into it.
Okay, well, my actual title is head of comic book strategy, which
Okay.
I'm not even sure anyone else in the world is head of comic book strategy for anybody. Maybe Marvel and DC have something like that, but my business partner, my former business partner, Sean Goodrich, and I were both hired at the same time. And so it would have been weird. We just discussed being joint head of comic books. And I was like, it just doesn't seem to make sense. If you're on your own in a convention and trying to explain who you are in the organization, it doesn't make sense to have the same title as each other. So he's head of comic client partnerships, and I'm head of comic book strategy, which sort of means that he's responsible for revenue and I'm responsible for figuring out how to improve it. So
okay.
Yeah.
So what's a normal day-to-day like for you? Because obviously it is such a fun job and such a fun gig. I'd love to know day-to-day, because what's your creative process like? You're obviously, aside from being bothered by people like myself to ask you questions, like what's your day-to-day like? Because that's something that I'm sure comic fans are like, can I do this for a living? That's amazing.
Well, my day-to-day used to be email. So I'd open my email and there'd be dozens, if not hundreds, of inquiries about people wanting to sell their collections. And how that happened was I built a website called Sell My Comic Books. And Sell My Comic Books is just a lead generating machine. It's content, it's price guides, it's articles, basically content marketing. And it brings in inquiries. We offer free appraisals. We were the first people to do this. Now there's a bunch of people kind of imitating us, which is always flattering. But yeah, so originally my goal was just provide information for people who maybe their uncle just passed away and they've got a collection sitting in the basement and they don't know what to do with it, or maybe they were a collector back in the day and now they just want to retire and downsize, which happens a lot. Apparently there are 40,000 American citizens retire every day.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's kind of crazy. And so some of those still have their comic books. I still hear the old story about my mom gave them away while I was at college. That I hear a lot. It
happened to me. It was post college, but it happened to me. And this was right before, I think, the second boom, right? I think we're in a 5 to 10 year period where it's funny. I'm kind of a data nerd sometimes. So I look at historical data and I'm just like, I get so much FOMO looking at the prices from back to 2015. And I'm like, I'm so upset with myself. But yeah, it happened to me as well. So I'm sure it's a common story.
Yeah, I think it's there's a secret handbook of how to be a parent published in the 1950s. And in the mom section, it's throw away any collectibles your kid has while he's at college. And in the dad section, is self-medicate with beer. And I think that people just have been following the playbook.
That's awesome.
But you asked me about my day-to-day. So my day-to-day is very different to how it used to be. My day-to-day used to be go through collections lists, ask for email, for pictures over email, price out those comic books, make an offer for the collection. If it's purchased, get it shipped to our office where the staff would go through it, figure out what needs to be pressed, what needs to be graded, what can just be lotted up for eBay and so on. And since Goldin acquired us, now it's really different. Now we have to think about the bigger picture, how can we make Goldin relevant in comic books, because they've really been number one in sport for a long time. And not so much known for comic books. We sold some amazing stuff like Action 1, Detective 24, Yeah. Like,
We connected because I was on an auction. And little did I know, of course, I was around my birthday time too. I was looking at a restored Amazing Fantasy 15, and you guys broke the record for, what was it, that restoration of that grade. I saw later on, and I think it was another site was like, this is now the highest price for this book in this restored grade. And I was like, I went in, I'm like, oh, I could go up to this, and then suddenly it spiked, and I was like, all right, I'm out. Like, cards on the table.
That's a pretty interesting book, because there are like grades of restoration, right? And you probably know this, but a book that's restored can either be a complete basket case, like it can have had like a professional like gloss it and trim it and add pieces that were missing and recolor it and everything, or it could just be like this one. I think just had a bit of color touch on it, which can actually be reversed if you know what you're doing.
I think everyone had the same idea when they went in there. They're like, if I can make this even like a 5.5 or a 6 unrestored, you're looking at, a book that could be worth like, upwards of $80,000. And so I think everyone had the same idea. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, there are plenty of stories of people who have gambled all in on restored books and had them reversed. Sean and I actually we bought a Superman 1. It was part of a collection. It was clearly restored. It had paint on it. I mean, like some kid had painted over it. So like, I mean, does that even really count as restoration? I think it's a whole other debate. But anyway, so Sean and I are looking at this going, well, we set it aside and said to the guy, look, we'll make a deal just for this book at the end. And we bought the rest of the collection, and we said, okay, look, how do you feel about $20,000? And this was back in, I think it was 2017 or 2018. It was a pretty substantial collection. Anyway, we paid, I think, 60 or 70,000 for everything. But the Superman 1, I wanted to do it separately, because we said to him, it's clearly not right. Like, there's paint on it. It needs, it's restored. And we showed him comps. I think the comps were like 30,000 for a restored copy in that condition. And we said, look, 20,000 feels like a fair price. We have no idea what grade it is, really. It's hard to tell. We had the restoration removed, and then now it looks like worms have eaten the cover. It looks horrible close up. But from 5 feet away, it's a Superman 1 in a universal holder. It's a 1.5. And
that's amazing.
So that turned out to be one of our best ever buys.
Wow.
Yeah. So pretty happy to have that.
I love stories like that. Like, I get geeked out when I hear stories like that, because it's just so much fun. And then also just, man, it does feel like everything's moving so fast and growing so fast. And I mean, the fact that you said it was 2017, 2018, that's crazy. It feels, even though it's 5 years ago, it feels, in comic book world, especially when I think COVID really spiked things up and everything like that, like it feels like decades ago at this point, which is crazy.
Yeah, COVID was a really fascinating study into economics generally. If you think about what happened, you had the government saying everyone's got to stay home, no one can work, no one can make money, no one can spend money, no one can do anything. And then luckily the internet was by then well established, and people could at least do something with their time, because imagine if COVID had hit like 35 years ago, when we had like 5 domestic channels and no internet and no Amazon, no way to ship stuff easily, and I was crazy. Our staff wouldn't touch boxes. Like we had this whole thing where they said, oh, boxes have got to sit for 7 days before anyone's going to open them, and it was really scary. There was at least a 3-month period when I thought, I don't know if this business is going to make it. I really don't. And I'm sure everyone felt the same. I'm just like a microcosm of that. But the interesting part economically was all the money the government was shoveling into people's houses, and people, all the time they had, and just like people were discovering themselves again, like, oh, comic books, I haven't touched these for years, and they were in the basement. And we actually stopped buying because people weren't selling. They were buying plenty of stuff, but they weren't selling. Wow. And yeah, it was crazy. Like prices were going up and up and up, and eventually things settled down. The vaccine started to roll out, and people sort of realized, well, you know, maybe I should be saving some of this free money instead of just like throwing it at collectibles. But so we've seen a correction. But I think if you look back at 2019, prices are above 2019 prices now, even
Oh yeah.
yeah, even with correction.
I think I did so I host so Shortbox is another platform that buying, and I host their TikTok, and we did a like a new series like 10 years ago today to look at the progression, and there was like the one that I did was an AF15, it was a 1.0, and those are, you know, anywhere from the 15 to 18 range currently, and I think 2019 right before the boom was like 8, and it's just like it's crazy. And I think, you know, look, there was a huge culture shift. You know, I think also collecting in general just spiked. Like I know personally I got into sneakers in 2019, and you know, there was it was kind of like the sum of all fears. Like the Jordan documentary came out, those spiked and boomed. My wife works in e-commerce and retail, so she knows she works in luxury, so she knows, and she saw like that incredible spike. And I think to your point, like people are finding themselves, but also finding their passions again. And so whatever you were into, and then I found my way to comics. Of course, a couple years, the story of my life, a couple years too late, you know, like probably 2020, 2021. And I was like, yeah, smart move to start collecting now. But yeah, it's been interesting. And I love looking at the progression. I love, you know, talking about the stories. I could geek out all day on them because I'm fascinated by that. I'm also fascinated by history and how things move, and businesses and commerce too. I think it's a blast. So I'm having a blast talking to you right now about this stuff.
What do you collect yourself?
So I have, if you behind there, I have a whole I collect comics for sure. So if you go around here, I mean it is nuts. I collect definitely comics and all kinds of things. Funkos are up there. Like I said before, definitely sneakers as well. I've kind of streamlined the sneakers a little bit, you know, as we've started this and really pushed into what we do at Nerd Initiative. I've kind of been like, all right, let's pull back on that, and kind of just, you know, have fun. And so it's been a blast. I mean, even here, like some of the art that has boomed, you know, mid COVID, like Bottleneck Gallery and some of the other artists we've connected with, it's just a blast to kind of like, I love the relationship building and the talking and the connecting with people, as you can tell. So for me, it's all about that and observing the craziness that you see out there. You know, like have a limit of what you're going to go for.
Yeah.
And then pull back and say, all right, this is what, you know, I'm willing to spend on this kind of stuff. But I'd love to hear. So we always do, like when we talk to new people, we always do like their nerd origin story. And it obviously sounds like, yeah, it always sounds like you have an amazing one, you and your partner. And I love the fact that you guys, and I was looking, actually doing obviously research before talking to you, and I saw the website, and it's really interesting to find out the success of that and how it, you know, obviously boomed. And then obviously it's, you know, always a dream to have a big company come in and be like, hey, we recognize your talents and recognize what you've built. But before that, taking it all the way back, what like how did were comics your first, like, you know, fandom love, like as a kid, or was there something else? Like I know I was a comics and cards, you know, kid of the 90s. And we watched that go the way it went. But
Yeah.
I remember, you know, again, similar story to everyone. You know, comics helped me learn to read when I was young and all that. I feel like I'm the definition of a non-player character in real life, but I have this progression. But I'd love to know like your origins of how and what you were into first, like what you can remember is that you got like hooked on when you were younger.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've actually written about this a little bit in an old blog which no longer exists because I don't know, someone said, "Oh, you're paying way too much to host this. I'll move it for you," and then he since disappeared from my life, so that was a bit awkward.
Wow.
So yeah, no,
well, invitation's always open. If you ever want to do anything again, Nerd Initiative, we are here for you. That's the whole point. So
well, thank you.
We'll
yeah,
talk later about
I'll
that.
definitely tell you my origin story though. So it was apparent from quite an early age that I was born to be around words. Like words were I could read crazily young. Like I don't know who taught me to read. I guess my grandmother or my mother. But anything you put me in a room, and if it was like a choice between ash is bouncing off the walls or how can we keep him quiet, it was just like anything printed. It would be literally anything. I could read anything. Novels. I was at school when people were like, see Spot run. I was, my teacher would just look at me and and she'd say, go to the library, take a book and start reading, because I was so advanced reading wise that it was clear I was bored out of my head. So I was reading novels. I think my first novel was Swiss Family Robinson in first grade.
Wow.
And yeah, it was a very boring book, but I kind of knew it was boring even then. That was weird. So reading was my passion, and my mum had twins when I was about 5, and so she had a lot of competition for her attention, and so her way of keeping me quiet was to buy me something to read. And we used to live in London. I moved to Canada in 2002. Prior to that, I lived near London in England. And there was an antique store that had one of those like Mary Poppins strollers outside. And so my mum was pushing the twins along in this thing and dragging me along by one hand. And I was looking over the rim of this thing. I could barely see over it. And it was full of comic books. I'm like, can I get some of those? I'm like, yeah, sure. They're a penny each, a British penny each back then. And I think it was like 1977, something like that. And so she just bought me a little stack of what I thought, thinking back, I think, oh, wow, they were like Silver Age, but probably not. Probably they were returns to a newsagent or something, like probably Marvel's greatest comics. Like, it was Fantastic Four mostly and Spider-Man I was reading. So most likely they were more likely to be reprints, to be honest. But anyway, I read them from cover to cover. And when people say I read something from cover to cover, nobody reads all the ads. But no, I read literally every word in every comic book, cover to cover to cover.
It's so awesome.
Around the same time, there was a burger chain called Wimpy's in the UK that came out with a deal where they had a poster. You get a free poster, and every time you bought a burger, they give you a sticker, and it was Marvel heroes. And so kind of that thing was going on. And then my grandmother used to have me in the week for school. Long story, my mum was getting divorced, and it was a bit awkward to be at the house all the time. So I lived with my grandparents. And after school, I think it was Wednesday, there were the reruns of the Adam West Burtward Batman TV shows. And my friend and I used to sit there with probably a sandwich or something. We'd just watch that, and it was so cool. And then Corgi came out with the toys, those die-cast Batman, and with the little Batman and Robin characters. It was just the time. It was a much more pure age. Now we are really distracted. Like my kids are teens, and there's just so much competition now for their attention. Video games are immersive and incredibly addictive, and there's a lot of things happening for kids now. But back then, there weren't that many things. Like I remember coming home from school, going, "Can I go outside and play?" And there was none of this. Oh, got to be in full sight at all time, wearing a watch that you can press a button and call the police at any moment. Like no one was that. Like I lived in a little cul-de-sac, or a street with 7 houses in it, and we were outside all the time when we weren't eating or sleeping. And so, we'd go outside, we'd play with our GI Joes, we'd take a plastic bag and make a parachute and throw him off the flat roof at the house, like just boring stuff like that. But it passed the time, and I look back at that and I think that was a really innocent times, and I really enjoyed being a kid in that era. I'm really sorry actually that children seem to spend their time being shuttled around from place to place in a minivan. They just don't hang out anymore and pass an hour or two just like breaking things and killing ants and like searching through the grass for insects, and they just don't do that stuff anymore, which is you walk through a suburb and you think, is this the zombie apocalypse? There's literally nobody outside. Where is everybody? They're all indoors. So anyway, fast forward to I guess my late teens. I got my first job. I was freelancing for a newspaper and a magazine. I was just like putting my name out there. I didn't go to university. I got straight A's in English language and literature, and I could have probably gone to university quite easily, and I just didn't know why I would. I didn't feel like going to university as an English major would have been a clear path to something I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to write, and the local publishing house just wanted me to start there, and I was hired as an editorial assistant. And I was living the dream. I was reviewing video games for a living. You know, I was like, I would have happily done it for free, but someone was paying me to do it. So, you know, it's amazing. Great. I remember waking up in the morning. My grandmother had a glass door, like her front door was glass. And every morning, my first thing I would do would be like, come out of my bedroom, look down the stairs and see how many packages were leaning against the glass door, because the video game companies had me on their mailing list. So I'd get free video games like constantly into my night, right? So around that time, it was Commodore Amiga that I was reviewing video games for. So like every morning,
that's a throwback. That is a throwback.
Yeah, yeah. And I wish I kept all those games, because they're now starting, you know, to become collectible again. And yeah, in the original cellophane, those things are like, video games are crazy now.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, I remember I was a Nintendo kid, like the 80s and 90s. So, you know, Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I was like just looking on the site before, you know, one sold for like over 50,000, and I mean it's just nuts. Like, it's crazy.
I don't get it, you know. Like I know I do this for a living. I know collectibles are how I survive, how I thrive, but I still don't get it. You know, like the less something's been enjoyed, the more it's worth. You know, which I understand, like from a like a scarcity perspective, that makes sense. But it's a shame in a sense. Like,
yeah.
For
me, it's cool. I mean, the thing I will say, like with comics, though, like and again, I know comics has been the same thing. I mean, I think the one shame about comics is it depends on who you go to get them graded, right? Like CGC won't verify, pre-signed things, but every now and then you'll see something pop up that is just so cool. There was one that I saw, I think it was on Amazing Fantasy 15, and it was like to David Stanley, and it was in pen. So, you know, this is like a 70s or an 80s signature. And so like, I just start daydreaming and thinking about like I don't want to call it provenance, but like the history behind it and the lineage of like who this was at, and then who it got, you know, passed down to or sold to. And that's the kind of stuff I think is incredibly cool. Or like you see the coverless comics that are out there, and the kid puts his name on the top, you know, margin of the splash page. I love that stuff. I think that is like what makes it historic and super cool. But I know what you mean about like games, and like even now, like now it's Funkos are starting to get graded and whatnot, which is crazy to me, because I don't think I've ever gotten a Funko that's in good condition, even from the company. So, but it is nuts. Like, to your point, like I remember as a kid, we were, again, the 90s were, for people that don't know, were a boom for collectors and eventually a bust. But I remember collecting everything from Jurassic Park and we kept everything in the closet. We were like in the original containers. And so either you bought two so you could play with one, or you just bought one and you put it away. And looking back, like that really is sad. I didn't get to play with all the stuff that I was getting. So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So what happened for me for collectibles was the big change for me was the internet, and not in the way you might expect. So being a freelance journalist, my job was essentially to either write something or to get out there and knock on doors and get hired to write something. So that's the life of a freelance journalist, unless you get to the top level. It's like any career.
Yeah.
Once you get to a certain point, people know who you are, and you have more opportunities than you need. Like, so when some of my comic books got really, really popular with Google, we had more collections offered to us than we could afford to buy. That's a really interesting story. I'll come back to that in a minute. But so being a freelance journalist, it was really like a contacts thing. So I had almost like a Rolodex. I could call the same editors over and over again. The most challenging part was people moved from job to job. So back in the day, in the 90s, when magazines and so on were really popular. There were lots of them, and men's magazines. I used to write for Maxim in the UK. All the computer game magazines. People would move around a lot, so you'd get to know somebody. They'd start hiring you, and then they'd change jobs, and then you're like back to square one again. That was the most difficult part. But then when the internet kicked off, you'd think, oh, great, opportunity, globalization, like it's easy to find something. That's the problem. As a freelance journalist who wasn't at the top of the game, and so not being offered jobs, still hunting jobs, suddenly people in India who or the Philippines, whose English was really good, maybe they didn't have the talent I had, but they had the time and they were available for free or like 1/10 of what I would charge just to make a living. Like I wasn't living the dream. I was just making a living. I was getting outbid on online platforms for jobs, and suddenly like I can't survive doing this anymore. So then I was like, okay, well, I need to think of a plan B because plan A is not working very well. And at that time, it's strange how things happen. My mum called me and she said, I need you to come over to the house. I'm moving. My attic is full of your stuff. I don't want to move it again. Can you come and get rid of it? Give it away, throw it away, whatever. So I'm like, okay, I don't even know what's there. I didn't even know she had any of my stuff. So I go up into the attic, and this is kind of a weird side note, but I don't know if you've ever been electrocuted, but it's a really strange feeling. So in the UK, we don't have basements, so everything's in an attic, and there's usually a hatch that you have to climb up through to get into the attic. And the way the roofs are quite steeply sloped, and so you can never stand up in an attic. It's usually pretty tight up there. It's like a crawl space, really. And there's always a light somewhere, but whoever built that house had put the light right next to the hatch. And at some point, someone had broken the bulb by putting a box up there without taking the care or whatever. And as I climbed into the hatch to get up, my hand went over the bare socket of the light switch, and I was like, what the heck happened to my hand just now? And I could feel this jolt going up my arm, and I was like, what the heck was that? And so I got back down and I look at my hand, and there's a burn from the light socket on my hand. It was like, oh, I just got electrocuted. I had no idea what it feels like to get electrocuted. It's such a strange feeling. It's I don't know quite why I told you this, but I guess it's like this is almost like the superhero origin moment, like somebody, and then so anyway, I climb back up, being careful not to kill myself on the light socket with a flashlight. I'm shining around, and it's almost like an episode of the X-Files. There's all these heaps of stuff, and I'm like, what is all this? And I remember that I used to collect. I don't know if you know who Games Workshop are, but they do Warhammer 40,000. Yeah. So back in the day, I collected the little miniatures, which were a lead alloy. So it was lead and pewter, I think.
Back when lead was popular, lead paint, all kinds of stuff. I remember that.
Oh, I'm sure my IQ is like 20 points lower than it should be, because I used to I'd be painting these things and then stick my hands in my mouth, like eating chips or whatever. But yeah, for years that was my hobby. I would just paint these things while listening to music. And another thing kids don't do, they don't just get off their screens and do something fun with their hands. So anyway, so I started bringing all these boxes down. So I had maybe 300 of these metal figures, and I had all my Dungeons and Dragons stuff, which of course now, because of Stranger Things, is back in vogue. So I was going through all my video games, were still up there. I had comic books. I had all kinds of stuff. I'm like, slot cars. I used to be really into slot cars, which are like 1/32 scale racing cars. On a track. And you just like put this thing on the slot, and you'd had little controllers to make them speed up and slow down. I used to have loads of that. So anyway, so I brought all this stuff down. It's like a yard sale in someone's attic. Like I just looked at it all going, I have no idea what I'm doing with this. But my mum said, it's leaving the house right now. So I literally filled my car up with it. Drove home, unloaded it all, and I left it in piles around my apartment for at least a couple of weeks. I just had no idea what to do with it. I was a bit overwhelmed. And I was chatting to a friend, and they said, have you heard of eBay? And I said, no, what's eBay? This is around about this dates it because it was around about 2000 because my eBay account goes back to 2000. And in the UK, eBay had just launched. It was a brand new thing. No one knew what it was. It was completely free. So that's how they got you hooked, right? They just let you use it for free.
I remember this.
Yeah. And oddly enough, you didn't even need a photograph of what you were selling. You just need a description. So I'm like, okay, eBay, right? So I kind of browsed through it and started looking up the stuff that I already had. Like, I'm like, okay, well, what's a 1990s slot car worth? Like, what's a Porsche Turbo 930 from like 86 worth, out of its box? And I was like, oh, wow, that's like 50 bucks. I was like, wow, really? I could get this much, but I was going to just dump all this stuff. And now I'm like, wow, okay, so there's some money sitting on this floor here, and I was kind of struggling because the writing wasn't going super well. So I'm like, well, at least if I sell all this, I can make, pay the rent for a couple more months. So I went through it, and I did so well with all the junk that I'd had in my mum's loft. I was like, I could do this for a living. I could go around buying other people's junk and resell it on eBay. And so that's the kind of origin, that electric shock moment. It was the origin of me buying and selling collectibles. And yeah, so I did that full time. I had every part of my apartment was covered in stuff at one point. I didn't have any storage unit or anything. It was just like, I literally would wake up, start describing stuff, listing it on eBay, packing up the stuff I'd sold. And it's crazy. Like some of the things you turn up when you start looking.
Yeah.
You just don't know what you're going to find. That Dungeons and Dragons, I'll tell you one little story about Dungeons and Dragons. So in the UK, Dungeons and Dragons it was niche in the US, but it was super niche in the UK. It's like anything, like NFL, there is like 0.5% of the population of the UK probably are into NFL. In the 80s, they did highlights once a week. I think it was a Sunday. They did the NFL weekly highlights, and they would show the results, and the best of game would get like half an hour of highlights, and so my generation was introduced to NFL, but it was literally on the worst channel at the worst time of the week, and it was very niche. And so even now, I think there's one or two NFL games actually held in London every year.
Yeah, Wembley Stadium, right?
Yeah, Wembley Stadium. But I mean, probably most people don't care about NFL there. Like we watched the Super Bowl. I used to stay up once a year and watch the Super Bowl, and I would dream of like it being like a close game because by the third quarter, one team was 25 points ahead. You're kind of like trying to keep your eyes open, but it's late, and it's like 2 a.m. by the time it's finished, and you don't care at that point. You just want to go to bed. Anyway,
especially if you're referencing, like, because you said the start of eBay, it's probably well, no, that's after. I was gonna say the Buffalo Bills years in the 90s were rough, because that was what 4 straight years where it was not, the first one was close, and then so yeah, you had some pretty bad games I think in the 90s and the early 2000s before, and then the Patriots caught fire, and then things got exciting again. But that was a rough time to be a football fan for a while.
Yeah, if you're into North American culture, living in the UK is kind of tough because if you want to watch the Oscars, it's another 2 a.m. finish, I remember doing that with my friend once, and we were watching, and it was the year that A Beautiful Mind won Best Picture. And forgotten the name of the director. He used to be in Happy Days. What's his name? Ron Howard.
Yeah.
Howard, they did this thing, they do this thing where they show a close-up of the faces of all the directors. It was like someone had already told Ron Howard he'd won. Like he already knew. Like he was sitting there going, I've won this. And you couldn't keep it off his face. He was trying to look like anxious, but someone had told him. It was so obvious. And me and my friend were looking at each other going, why did we stay up to watch this? Anyway, Dungeons and Dragons. So Dungeons and Dragons was super nerdy niche in the UK. Like very few people played it. I think in the mid 80s, it was kind of a thing. I used to play with my friends from high school. And there was one convention, literally one convention. Someone organized a convention in Stoke-on-Trent, which is this town right in the middle of the UK near Birmingham, famous for pottery. I think it's where they used to make all the plates and MB, all that kind of stuff. So you can imagine one-off event in 1985, I think it was, or 86. somebody created, if you remember Dungeons and Dragons back in the day, you'd have the hardback books with all the rules and the monsters and everything, and then you have modules, which were like these cardboard sleeved things, and inside was a slip. It wasn't attached to the cardboard sleeve. It was just like a booklet that was slid inside, and sometimes there'd be a map and things. And so it would be a complete adventure, and the dungeon master would have a book, and the players would have so these were modules. So that's how you played. You bought these adventures off the shelf if you wanted to like have a ready-made adventure. And so for Stoke-on-Trent, they created this one-off module called ST1. And there's rumor they printed 500. There's rumor they printed 700. We're not sure how many were printed, but they didn't sell very well, and they destroyed them afterwards. And so these things were the Action 1 of Dungeons. And one day I had this ad online, like I want to buy stuff, like, and someone called me, and he's going through what he's had, like, oh, I've got the Dungeon Master's Guide, I've got all these figures. He said, oh, I've got an ST1. I said, you've got an ST1? What's that? And he said, like playing dumb, he's like, oh yeah, I went to the convention in Stoke-on-Trent, and I have an ST1. I'm like, what time can I come over? So I go to the house, and my hands are shaking, and it's crazy. Collectors are like that, right? You see something big and you're trying to play it cool, and the guy named his price, and I felt like I can get the money out of all the other stuff and have an ST1 for free, you know. And so I took it home. I was like, this is it though, you know. This is the problem. Like, now there's nothing left to do in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, whatever I do with this ST1, I ended up selling it on eBay. I think I got about $1,000 for it.
Wonder what that's worth now.
Oh, I don't know. I've looked. I actually looked quite recently. I could not find any comps anywhere. They just don't exist. They really are that rare. Yeah, so that was a fun story about Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, I've got tons of that kind of stuff. But yeah, so
yeah, we gotta do this more often, because I could do this all day. This is fantastic. I love sharing these things. Like, I used to, with my grandfather, used to collect watches as well. I mean, this is not a very expensive one, but like vintage watches and stuff. And for the longest time, like my Grail watch, because we used to fix them up too, was not the Paul Newman Daytona, because that's ridiculous, but there was the one in the 90s. It was like a silver dial with black subdials. And the reason why that's so expensive now is because, again, like you said, with the ST1, like, they didn't sell well. People didn't like them, and they were like $1,000 in the 90s or whatever. And now they're like $100K because, and I think it's a gorgeous watch, but that's the craziest thing. When things don't sell well and people don't like them, it's funny. And I'm trying to think of an example recently, but I always think about that. I'm like, wait a second, should I pick this up if people hate this? Because it could be worth something down the road, because it's just, it's not going to be everywhere. It's not going to be like an X-Men 1 or a Spawn 1 or the ones that have like millions of copies out there. And so that's always fascinating. I mean, same with the Paul Newman. I mean, I think everyone knows that, what's that, the famous story of the guy, the veteran who never opened his, and got it from, it's amazing. If you get off, you should Google and watch it. This older, either a Vietnam, I think it's a Vietnam veteran, and I think it's an episode of like Antiques Roadshow or something, and he just goes in and he's like, hey, like, I have this that I got it from. He also got a discount because of like, he was in the army or whatever. So he probably got it for a couple $100 or whatever when he was, stationed somewhere, and he never opened it. So you're talking about a Paul Newman Daytona, and the guy, you can watch the guy's face. He's like, and he's not buying it. He's just like, and he's going to be honest. And he's just like, this is the best conditioned one I've ever seen. And the guy has no idea. And he's like, yeah, it's easily worth $500,000. And the guy's face dropped. It's an unworn Daytona, a Paul Newman. Like, it's unworn. Like, it's in the box. It has the receipt. Like, everything about it is, and I mean, talk about it. He's like, this is the best one I've ever seen. The guy is easily like, and the guy almost faints, the guy who has it, because you can tell, I think he's kind of unshaven. He's probably, he's probably okay, but he's probably not like well off. But I mean, it's life changing. And I just think about stuff like that. It's just so cool. It's so fascinating to think about stuff. I love those stories. the best.
Yeah, there are all kinds of niche collectibles that no one even thinks about, like cameras. Cameras. I have a friend who used to work in a camera store in Montreal, and he said this guy came in one day, and he had a shopping bag, a plastic shopping bag, and he put it on the counter. He said, I want to sell this, and I want to upgrade to a modern camera because I want to get back into photography. My father was a photographer, and this is his pride and joy, and he's just died. So, I want to know what I can get for it. So he's probably heard, it's like anyone who runs a store or anything like that. We've had comic book collectors come in with their pride and joy, and it's like 10 long boxes of $90s books, and you have to try and break it to them that it's not worth that much. Sorry. Anyway, so he's probably mentally rolling his eyes. He'll say, oh, well, okay, let's see what you've got here. So he puts it, he gets the thing out. He said the hairs were rising on the back of his neck already because it had the Leica logo on it, and Leica is like the camera to have. And he opened it up. It was a Leica Zero, which is like the first one ever. Yeah, I guess it's the equivalent of finding one of those Apple computers.
Yes, I was thinking that. I was just thinking that.
Yeah. So he said, I can't help you with this. I'm going to have to call my boss. So he called his boss, and the boss came down, and he looked at it, and he looked at my friend, and he looked at the customer, and he said, yeah, why don't you browse around and take anything you like? And the guy went, what do you mean? He said, like, literally, whatever you want, just put it in a big pile and we'll be good. So the guy just went around the store, took the most expensive camera and the most expensive tripod and the lights, and like literally made a giant pile of stuff. And the guy said, and I'll give you $20,000 as well.
Oh my God.
So I don't know what the thing was worth, but it's sort of like the Paul Newman watch story of cameras. And we've had moments like that too. Like our very first big collection was located near Washington, DC. And it's I remember I told you about watching the Oscars and how it was a real ordeal for me to watch the Oscars in the UK. So by the time I moved to Canada, my wife, and now my ex-wife, and I would sometimes host an Oscar party. But for me, it was like an excuse to have a few cocktails because I hated cocktails. By now, it was like I can't stand awards ceremonies. It's just so tedious. I'm not into celebrities, so there's no.
Especially now, I mean, it's gotten not to be a tangent, but yeah, especially now that the award shows are more and more becoming irrelevant. So it's just, I think they're finally realizing they got to figure this out because it is mind-numbing at this point. But yeah,
you need more incidents. You need more incidents where people get into fights on stage and stuff like that to make it interesting.
Like
I'm not sure that wasn't scripted, to be honest.
I think to this day, that's always going to be a question of like, come on, was that real? Was it not real? Like, it was such a shock and such a unique thing to do. And so yeah, I don't know if we'll ever know, but yeah, it's super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like some of those sporting moments where you think, was that rigged? Because it was just so unlikely. Again, it almost doesn't matter because it's more about the moment and who cares? Who cares? I mean, they're good enough actors to pull it off if it was scripted. So anyway, who cares? So I'm sitting there like 3 cocktails in going, I'm really bored. I'm just going to go and check my email. And I'd got a list from this guy maybe a week or so earlier. And I wasn't excited about it because although it had a lot of Silver Age and Bronze Age books, the first page had notes on it. So it'd be like a list. Some people make detailed lists, including condition, and some people just do the opposite. And I have to try and pick through lists and figure out what's what. But this one had notes on it. So missing cover has a cut, torn cover. So I'm like, okay, so this is a mid to lower grade collection. I did my job. I asked for images, not expecting anything exciting to happen. And so I go check my email during the Oscar ceremony, and he sent me pictures. So I'm like, okay, click on this. And it's like, oh my God, the condition of these is unbelievably high. It was like 9.6, 9.8 conditions. I'm like, what? Is this the same person? So it turns out that by coincidence, he'd listed his DC first, and those were the ones in bad shape. Maybe they'd been handed down to him by somebody or whatever, I don't know. But his Marvel were insanely nice, insanely nice. I literally called Sean. We were just working together at this point, and I said, "You got to see these pictures." And so the first question was, "How can we afford to buy these?" Because it was there were none of the big keys, there were none of the early Silver Age, but it was started like 1966, something like that. So FF 48, 52 were there. The really nice stuff were the giant ones, like so the annuals and stuff were super high grade.
Wow. And those are harder because of how thick they are. Like I have what do I have? I have it was Silver Surfer 3 or 4 is the first Mephisto, and that's a really tough book to get in a high grade too, because it's so thick. Those Giant Size X-Men, all those books are really, they just damage so easily because they're so like chunky.
It's really interesting. They keep well because they're thicker. Like if you have a bunch of comic books all kind of like randomly thrown into boxes and stuff, the thicker ones survive better because of the covers are thicker and they don't bend and crease as easily. But I don't know why CGC are very particular about how they grade them. So you look at one, you go, "This is perfect," and it gets a 9. And you're like, I'm not quite clear why this didn't get a 9.6. Why is it only a 9? I don't understand. And they don't publish their graders guidelines, so you can't really look at the graders guidelines for giant books and figure out why it is they are. I guess it's the way they're manufactured. They're glued to the pages, and maybe the glue dries, pulls things, and you get them wrinkled as stuff on the spine more often. But usually the covers are in better shape in general. There was a Marvel Superheroes 18. To me, it looked like a 9.8. And when we finally got to pick up the collection, actually it had a crease on the back cover, like a hard crease on the top corner. So it only got an 8. But yeah, so the collection was super high grade. Actually, when we picked it up, it had not been stored in perfect shape and conditions. So it hadn't been stored in climate controlled environments. So the inner pages were tanned. So you'd open the cover and it'd be tanned on the inside cover, and the inner pages were tanned. Now you can actually do something about that, but back then you couldn't. But still, we had books that were heavily tanned on the inner cover, getting 9.2s, 9.4s. So imagine if they hadn't been tanned, everything would have been 9.6, 9.8. We were driving, we flew down, paid for the collection, rented a minivan to drive it all back in, and I was doing the driving, and Sean was going through boxes going, this X-Men 50 is a 9.8. terrible light. And anyway, so we got back to his house, and with good lighting you could see the problems with the collection, but still it was an amazing deal. The guy was happy, we were happy, and it started us off on a good footing, and from there on things just got better and better.
Wow.
Collections kept coming in, we kept flying around the country picking them up. We have had some bad deals too. If you want to talk about a bad story, I don't mind.
Yeah. I mean, sure, absolutely. I mean, I want to do this more often because this is a blast. But yeah, I'd love to hear one bad story, and then I'd love to hear more about Goldin and like where, because obviously we want to get, I want to get that plug in there and where things are going and what the future holds for you guys there as well. But I'd love to hear a cautionary tale story, because I mean, it's always the case, right? Like there's good and there's bad, and I think in any case, especially in the early 2000s, I always tell this story because I interviewed Steve Borak one time, and he was talking about like, obviously like basically the father of modern grading was CGC and CBCS, and we were talking about like the 2000s where eBay, like, I mean, there was so much fake and restored stuff on there because no one knew. And I was telling him how I bought a fake Michael Jordan rookie that I didn't know till years later. Like I'd bought it when I was in college, and I was like, I'm going to hold on to this. And then I had no idea. And then years later, I went to stupidly sell it, though wouldn't matter because it was fake. And someone called it out and was like, oh, you can tell it's a reprint. Like, and I was like, and of course that person was gone. And so, yeah, I mean, it's especially going from the Wild West days, but to now, I mean, you just never know. There's so much up and down. But it just, hopefully it's overall down the road that it's all mostly positive and whatnot. But I'll shut up now and let you tell a fast
Well,
story. I tend
was
to
gonna,
ramble on and on.
I was going to comment on what you were saying, because I think the big advantage of CGC and CBCS is avoiding buying things that are fake or restored. Unless you know, I mean, if it's a purple label, you know it's restored, at least you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I was told that dealers would sit at conventions and color touch in front of people, but that was what people did, you know.
Yeah.
Some of the Mile High books apparently have color touch on them,
That's
which
crazy.
to me is just like, why on earth would you do that? But that's just what dealers used to do.
Yeah.
That was part of their job, was to make things as nice as possible. There's a fairly well-known dealer in Montreal who I don't even know if he's still in the business, but he was well known for selling restored books as if they weren't. And so, you know, you buy stuff from him and get it slabbed, and it would be like 50-50, it would be restored, you know. It's just, yeah. And there's plenty of stories like that. But what I would say, I had two really great stories, but I'm going to limit myself to one. It would be my first ever comic book deal as like a full-time dealer. I found this guy advertising a collection, and it was advertised in a really strange place where you wouldn't expect to find comic books listed. And so I stumbled across this completely by random, looking for something totally different. And he had Silver Age, like deep runs of X-Men and Avengers, and like from #1 up, and the prices were really interesting. Like, they were not complete steals, but if it was exactly as he said, they were really good. And so I must have gone through his entire collection, saying, like, I did a spreadsheet. I was figuring out what should I buy, what's going to be the biggest return on investment, how much money can I borrow, because we literally were living on credit cards and line of credit to make things happen at those days. And so I got $9,500. I borrowed one of those stupid little belts you put around your waist in case you get mugged. And so my friend drove me.
You mean a fanny pack? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, fanny pack. There you go. That's what it's called. So I had $9,500 around my waist, and I was thinking, well, if it's 10 grand, I have to declare it at the border, so this is less, so I don't have to. And anyway, so we get down there. It was in Massachusetts, and my friend said, "Oh, this doesn't look very, very promising. Are you sure you're not going to get mugged here? Because the stairs were like up to the deck were falling apart, and there were bags of cement and things everywhere, and it was a very rundown looking place." So we get up there. It's an older couple, and I look through the sliding doors into the living room where I'm going to be looking at the books, and there are 4 boxes in there, and none of them have lids, and all I can see is like orangey brown tops of books. I'm like, uh-oh, that doesn't look good. This doesn't look good. These don't look near mint at all. Like, I haven't I opened the box yet, but they look really rough. And so, you know, what he described as, you know, near mint was like a 2.0, and they've been stored in his garage. There were little paper beetles running around and as I opened them up, the little triangles were flaking off, and they were brittle as hell. And so I remember spending 2 hours going through this, and my friend went off to Home Depot to kill some time, and he came back and he said, "Please don't tell me you bought all those books." I said, "Yeah, I didn't spend a single dime on this collection. I just said, I'm sorry. This stuff is not as described."
Yeah.
And I would say that my #1 takeaway was never travel without proper images of what you want to buy. That's actually how I met Sean. He was working at Comic Link at the time. And my plan was buy the stuff in Massachusetts, drive up to Portland, Maine, stay overnight, go to Comic Link in the morning, drop off my treasure, and start like Monty Burns, like imagining all the money coming back to me. And it was a complete bust. It was a complete bust. It was the most disappointing thing. I mean, I've built this up in my head to this giant store, and I would say, like, anyone who wants to make a living buying and selling collectibles, you should always be prepared for the disappointment. Always be prepared for the good things too, the nice surprises too. But there are always times when you think you can't lose, but you can. and that was just like, it was such a disappointment. It was crushing. It was a crushing day. It was so bad. I
can only imagine the mindset too. Like, how did you? I mean, I think it's a really, not only a cautionary tale, but also it's a really good learning experience from probably what you did after, because obviously where you are today, how did you immediately like not only pivot but persevere? Because I think a lot of the things in life that don't work out are because of moments where we give up, right? Like something like that happens and we're like, all right, this is not going to work out. It's not meant to be. But I think it's really interesting that you obviously you're very successful at this. So what was like the immediate, like whether it's days or weeks afterwards, that you were able to kind of push through, especially mentally, and be like, all right, I'm still going to do this. This is just one setback. Luckily you didn't spend the money you had, so you still had that. It was just a way, obviously a trip and the expenses that are allotted with that, and the mental disappointment. But how did you turn things around like immediately after that? Because I think that's important. Is that a lesson for people to be like, all right, like, look, you're going to have these things, but you can get to the place you want to get to. Because I think we all go through, we learn from the negative experiences.
Well, I think it was really signs that things were going the right way were starting to appear. So the website was designed to bring in leads, and that collection, the disappointing collection, I found by random chance. It didn't come to me, I went to it, and so it was kind of like, in the end, I just said to myself, well, it was too good to be true. So when something seems to be too good to be true, it probably is. But I started receiving emails from the website, not many, like at the time maybe like 1 or 2 a day. But I was like, okay, I'm getting a couple of emails, and I was trying to buy collections in the Montreal region, but so are a bunch of other people. So you'd put an ad on Craigslist, and there'll be 5 other dealers, all who've been doing this longer than me, who are all competing for the same little fish. And I was like, proof of concept will be if I get a collection from outside of my geographical region. And so the first one came from Florida. Unfortunately, Neat Stuff Collectibles had already made an offer on it and was flying down and booked a flight and everything. So she, even though I outbid them, she wouldn't do it. She said, I'm really sorry. I kind of promised this guy and he's already booked a flight. And I said, yeah, I tried to convince her. She wouldn't do it. But then I got one from Vancouver. I mean, there is literally no way I could have got this collection from Vancouver any other way. Like it was like back in the day, Uncle Charlie would have just picked up the yellow pages and called a dealer from Vancouver and sold it there. But no, his nephew was doing the stuff, and he did the research. He found my website, contacted me, shipped the stuff to Montreal. I mean, that's the only way I would have got it. And that proved to me that I was doing something right, because I got a collection that no one else would have got. And so I just doubled down. Like I said, okay, I just need to keep building the website, keeping the faith, and it's just started to gain momentum. And I think you're right. There are moments in life when people give up. There's a whole book by Seth Godin about this called The Dip.
Yeah,
which is he's an awesome writer. If you haven't read any Seth Godin, I would recommend anyone watching this to read some Seth Godin. He wrote Purple Cow, which is he's probably his most famous book. Purple Cow is essentially, if you're driving through a countryside in France, you see all these beautiful cows. Like the first 5 minutes, it's like, oh, look how beautiful those cows are, and in a while, like, you're so bored of all the cows. They're all beautiful. But what happens if you see a purple cow? And then suddenly that's interesting. And so his point is that everyone's good. Like, you go to a restaurant, you're not going to recommend that restaurant to your friend if it's just good. It's got to be amazing. It's got to be something crazy. So for somebody to create a product or a service or something that's really special, that's the way to get noticed. It's not to tell people how good you are. It's to be better than everyone expects. Yeah. And then people will do the marketing for you. They'll go out and spread the word for you, which is kind of an interesting story. So I just kept going. The Dip basically talks about when you should give up and when you should recognize that your efforts are still going to pay you back. It's just a question of time, which is a really hard thing to decide, because if you're doing something, let's say I had somebody in my life who was a singer. She trained for 20 years. And I would say at some point in that 20-year period, you'd say, okay, what's the end game here? Where am I actually going with this? Why am I spending all this money on coaching to be a better singer if I don't have a plan for what I'm going to do when I'm a really good singer? So I would say that person could have quit probably in year 7, when she was a really good singer, but didn't really have a plan for what to do with it. like someone said, "Oh, you have a beautiful voice. You should make a career out of this." But the willingness was there, the talent was there, but not the
How?
plan. Okay, what can I do with this talent? So choosing when to give up something is a very, very difficult thing, and I think people take that way too lightly. Sometimes it's like you're banging your head against the wall, like other times you're like, wow, I can't believe I'm lucky enough to be a comic dealer. Maybe I'm not the world's most successful comic book dealer or the luckiest or whatever, but I'm waking up every morning and opening boxes of comic books and selling them on eBay. Like that's achievement. That's an achievement. How do you measure success?
Yeah.
So so I think what I just realized was I'm getting these leads from all over the US. I'm doing something right.
The
If I
process
just
works.
keep going, I just need to figure out the things I'm bad at. And that's when Sean came into my life. He was good at the things I was bad at. So when we had our business, sometimes he'd call me and say, yeah, we need a new bank account. I'm like, oh my God. For me, it was like, oh, I wish I could show you this chair next to my girlfriend said to me yesterday, when are you going to sort out all your papers on this chair and get it really ugly? There's a big pile of papers right there. I mean, look, I should probably deal with it. But admin's not my thing. So when Sean said we need a new bank account, immediately I was like, oh God, I need a Valium, and he's like, what are you talking about? I'm just going to do it. I'm like, oh, good. You're going to take care of that. Yeah, sure. And he's like, we need to hire staff. I was like, oh God. And he said, no, I'm going to hire the staff. Don't worry about it. I'll find an office. Just keep the leads coming in. Let's keep the collections coming in.
Yeah.
So I'm good at that, and he's good at the other stuff. And that's how, businesses work, right? You find someone who's good at what you're bad at. I guess we should talk about Goldin.
Yeah, let's yeah. I mean, again, we're gonna do this more often because I this has been an absolute blast, and I think hopefully you've enjoyed it too, and are free to do this more often because I love this kind of stuff. But we should talk about Goldin because I do think it's also kind of like a coronation and a crowning achievement for you guys, for you and Sean, like the fact that again you've built something up, and then it's the growth process, more mainstream, and I love the fact that what you said before, when people think about auctions, obviously with comics, it comes, obviously Heritage comes to mind and there's other auction houses, but it's great that you're coming in because I'm putting myself in your shoes to build something at a big brand, which I think is always a blast, especially if you get the creative license to kind of do it your way. So I'd love to know about, where you guys stand now, what the strategy is, and then, what the future holds, what you're excited about. I'm sure it's just a blast, and I'm sure you're going to get in just through the work and the growth and what you've already accomplished, get in amazing collections, and it's going to, grow so fast and be another thing to be proud of. But I'd love to hear about the current process because that's always a really interesting thing that I think I've experienced in the past in my career. It's like bringing something that really well to a brand that has a lot of other really successful things, but's missing this. And so that's always fun to kind of like bring your perspective. And then there's always, the downsides of like having to fit into their culture and their process and what they do. And so there's always, I think, it's a sliding scale depending on where you are. There's some good stories and some bad stories, but I'm sure it's a good experience. I'd love to hear about how things are going, how things are starting, and what the plans are.
Yeah, well, Goldin have been super supportive. The deal to acquire us, we signed NDAs, I think back in a year ago, almost, I would say.
Wow.
And it took a long time. And it wasn't really, there was some, I would say there was some angst between Sean and I and our staff about, well, they didn't actually know until quite a bit later, but because we had an NDA. But Sean and I were worried, this is a big decision. This is something we built. Specifically, I started in 2012. He joined me in 2015, I think. So it was a ton of work. We created this personal 401k. I remember saying to Sean, what would happen if we didn't just sell everything? What if we just kept back some key issues and see if we can actually, they'd appreciate over time, and we could be like a retirement fund for us. So we called it the Vault, and we actually bought one of those giant bank vault type things with a wheel on it. I think it's a gun safe, but it's a Liberty gun safe, which are the big, like the Rolls Royce of gun safes. And so, you know, I so wish we'd done this thing. We went and bought a collection in Arkansas, and while we were the day before we got there, we stayed at the old what's it called? I'm trying to think now. The gangster hotel there, where the gangsters used to stay, like Bugsy Malone and stuff, used to stay in this hotel. So it's like, that's kind
in
of
Arkansas.
cool.
Wow.
In Arkansas, I can't remember. I would have to look it up. Anyway, so we're walking around Arkansas the day before because we got there a day early, and we saw this one of those little booths where you can dress up as cowboys and have your picture taken with sepia tone and stuff. I was like, wouldn't it be cool if we held up the Hulk one on the Air-15 and had our pictures taken as cowboys, like holding these things? And we never actually did it because we packed them up and shipped them before we remembered we were going to do that, which is a shame, but we should do that sometime. Why did I go there? What were we talking about?
The personal 401k, like the vault.
Oh yes, right. So yes. So I always wish we'd stood in front of the vault with cowboy hats on and stuff, and opened the door and showed our Superman 1, and we had 5 copies of Air-15, and yeah, all this was part of the deal. When Goldin acquired us, we kept ownership of those books, but we are going to be selling them on Goldin over the next couple of years.
Wow.
So those things have appreciated pretty well, as you might imagine, since 2017 when we started the vault. I think the coolest book we have in the vault, actually, we have a Batman 37, which is the black cover with the Joker beaming his face up into the sky. It's
yes,
like and that was actually bought in Canada. That was in a collection, and it was a double cover. The front cover was really kind of tatty, but the inner cover was super nice. And I was like, I know double covers are collectible and everything, but the first one was so ratty that it just didn't look very nice. So we just
took it off.
Yeah, and it got a 9.0 or a 9.2. I think it's a 9.2.
For anything of that era, like I'm always fascinated when I see those come in. Like, what was it recently? There was I saw go up an AF-15 at a 9.2. And obviously Batman is like 20 years before that. And I'm just like, how does that happen? Like, I mean, the double cover thing is a great story. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I'm just fascinated by that kind of stuff. And it's just, again, it's pieces of history that are just so cool. Like,
look, next time we talk, because we should talk again, remind me about the AF-15 thing, because I have a great story about AF-15, but let's talk about Goldin. So,
okay, sorry.
So back in September, the deal finally got struck, and Sean and I flew down to the office to do the meet and greet, and it was just fascinating. We come from like him being in his basement and me in my shed to a beautiful office with all these amazing people and a giant warehouse full of stuff. I mean, we're not sports guys, so when someone walks you around a warehouse which is mostly full of sports stuff, you're like, okay, I get this stuff is really cool. I'm sure some of it's really valuable, but you give me a free pass to pick one thing, I probably wouldn't pick the most valuable thing. I don't know what sports things are. I do know Honus Wagner is a bit of a thing, but that's about it.
There's a story behind it. Honus Wagner is much, again, like we said before, there's always an interesting story. I remember that, and I'm really quick non sequitur. I remember as a kid, like hearing that story. And I don't know if it's true or not because of the kids and tobacco, of like why he pulled the cards. But like essentially he pulled, that's the legend. He pulled the cards and there's only like a handful of them out there. And it's another great story of why that's such a rare card. And then you have other stories that, again, like I heard as a kid, and I don't know if they're true or not, because I need to look them up. But like the story I heard when I was a kid, that someone was digging in their backyard and found one in a tin box. And then you know, I think Wayne Gretzky bought, I think, the nicest copy in the world at one point years ago, but that's before grading, so maybe that's not true anymore. But yeah, that's, again, some our old stories. That's another one that fits in, where it's like we talked about with like the Newmans and the watch. I think there's only like maybe a handful out there, and so it's fascinating. That story is amazing. So sorry.
Yeah. So I guess the first little while was trying to figure out what Goldin is and where do we fit into this organization, and so I believe they had a couple of people in to do comics before us, and that wasn't working out, and so they bought us mainly to acquire our talent, and so as a sort of like entrepreneur who's like run it as a shoestring operation and lived hand to mouth for such a long time, it's fascinating to have the financial backing of a company that has resources that we could only have dreamt of. They have a proper studio to make videos in. They have
It's
people
amazing.
whose entire job is just to make sure the office runs smoothly. I'm like, wow, like we'd sit around. We had end up, I think, with 6 staff at one point, and sometimes someone would go, we were out of coffee, and there'd be like crickets and a tumbleweed would roll past, and nobody would know what to do next. Like, whose job is it to buy the coffee? Stuff like that. That sounds really strange, but when you're a small business person and you're used to solving problems one after another, it's fascinating to see a corporation who has a big plan and they have a roadmap. And so, for example, this week, I mean, just like in the last week or so, we've launched weekly auctions and a marketplace. They didn't have weekly auctions and a marketplace. Goldin, at least for sports customers, and this is coming for comic books, but for sports customers, you can vault your items with Goldin. So say you buy a $10,000 card and you don't want to ship it and you don't want to store it somewhere yourself, they put it into a secure vault. And if you want to list it for sale, it's a few clicks in your account and it's listed for sale, and they ship it direct to whoever buys it. And so there's a lot of things to admire about that, but you never really stop to think, wow, what does that actually look like to make that happen? The number of people involved in the process of dreaming up something like that, planning it, breaking it down step by step. Who's going to program this? Who's going to be responsible for the shipping part of this? Where's the storage? What's the storage facility look like? What's the insurance look like? What are the legal implications of this? Tons of stuff. One little example. So we during the due diligence process, someone asked a question about our website traffic. And so there seems to be a decline in some of your website traffic. And so we did some digging, and some of your competitors are using your brand to bid on Google as a keyword. And so when someone types sell my comic books, instead of seeing your site, they're seeing the people who are bidding on that keyword, and you should be protecting your brand. I'm like,
Wow.
I wouldn't even have thought of that. I've been too busy answering emails, And so one of the first things we did was we sat down with a copyright lawyer. They registered Sell My Comic Books as a trademark, and now Google and eBay have been told that anyone using that is in violation of our trademark, and they need to stop, cease and desist. Sure enough, no one's bidding on that keyword anymore because they can't. They're not allowed to.
Wow.
And that is just one example of how Goldin support has made life better for what we do. It's a big challenge. I think that the fact that there are some established players, Heritage and Comic Link have been mentioned, Comic Connect, Lone Star do quite well. There are some, I think there's a bunch of others. I'm sure
Hip Comic is kind of like a mix between Whatnot and the auction houses. So like, it's weird. I just went on theirs, and it's funny too, because like, and you would appreciate this at some point. Speak to my wife, because my wife now works for a watch brand. She went from luxury goods. She used to work for Farfetch. She was like one of like the original people there, and then she moved to, now she's at Hodinkee. And so they're trying to figure out how their selling platform is. So we've talked about, and so I show her everything because she's fascinated, because again, she runs like VIP client experience, which which is why, I mean, how we connected is, Sean reached out to me. I always respond, because I always appreciate when people reach out to me, and that's how I connected with Shortbox too. Like, I think when there's that kind of small company feel and people reach out, that's the future to me, is like this, it's the experience. And I think as people start to value that over other things, it's super important to be able to talk to people and learn and whatnot. I don't know where I was going with what I was saying just now, but no, with auctions, and so there's some that, and they're all over the place, and eventually the good ones will outstay the other ones. But yeah, like some of them are crazy. Like I had to get off like things like Whatnot, because it's ongoing all the time, and you never know. And there's so many dealers, and it's more of a platform than an actual brand. And then, Hip Comics, another one where the auctions are 24/7. And so it's like, it can get to be too much. And you just don't know who you're dealing with and whatnot. And I think things like Golden Heritage, like you're getting what you pay for, and there's no risk, very little risk, compared to other things. So it's super interesting to see the landscape changing and moving and stuff.
And Goldin's experience in sport, going from a player to becoming number one, didn't happen overnight, but their experience of doing that is going to be very helpful for us to grow the comics vertical. The challenge for us is nobody really knew that Goldin buys and sells comic books, and so if you ask 1,000 collectors where they would sell their collection, probably Goldin's name wouldn't even come up in that conversation. So our first job is to make people understand that we're in comic books, we're serious about it, we're here to stay, and we're going to do it better than everybody else. Over time, that message will get through, and then I'd like 1% of those people to say Goldin's name, and then 10%, and then 20%, and eventually we'll be number one, because we have that track record in sport. And we have the passion and the drive to get it done, and we have the resources too. Like Sean and I have walked away from, I can't tell you how many big collections we've walked away from, because our business model was dependent on margin. And we weren't selling with a buyer's commission, and we were just buying to resell, paying the seller's commission. So if we didn't have 30% in a collection, it wasn't worth buying, because the time and effort it would take for the 7 people that we had to do it would have just been not worth it. But with Goldin's buying power, with Goldin's resources, Goldin's people, the marketing team is amazing, the content team is amazing. We can only succeed. It'll just take time. It's just a question of my job as head of comic book strategy is to figure out how. And that's a big challenge, because the competitors are very well established. They have giant staff. I would say that quite a lot of people seem to be doing business the old-fashioned way, and there are interesting ways to do business in different ways that I think Goldin are really good at in the sport world, that I'm excited to bring to the comic books. So Goldin's, I don't know if you know this, but Goldin actually has a Netflix series coming out quite soon. The first season was shot last year, and it's being released in spring, I think, or late winter. And I'm expecting that to be a game changer.
Huge.
Yeah, because if people start watching Netflix and they're going to see that we're in collectibles, they're going to see all kinds of collectibles on that show. I'm sure we'll get lots of attention that way, and leads and interest. And I think there are different ways. Like when I started to sell my comic books, I went to a convention just to see what comic book dealers look like, and they looked exactly like they had in the 80s and 90s. No one had changed. Like, we now have the internet, but everyone was still doing business the old-fashioned way and lugging these boxes from show to show. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, why isn't anyone doing the internet? So that's the kind of thinking that's going to have to be brought to Goldin to move the needle. We're going to have to do things differently. Trying to out heritage at a convention isn't going to work. We need to be more original, think creatively, and get market share by doing something that no one else is doing. And I don't really want to say what, but I've got some pretty special ideas that I
was
know.
going to say, because it's all about finding the differentiator, right? Like, it's about being different and not just trying to go with what everyone's doing. And obviously, you don't want to, give anything away. Is there anything that you do want to mention that maybe you're excited about that you can mention? I don't want to put you on the spot. Like, obviously, like, I want to.
No. There's a program we're starting called Pressing with Goldin.
Oh, cool.
So if you have a raw comic book, let's say you have a Daredevil one and it needs to be pressed. Going to CCS, which is part of CGC, the turnaround time on pressing is insanely long. It's months, and then your grading time as well. I mean, obviously, a book like Daredevil 1 would be faster, but let's say you have a $200 book. You're not going to send that walkthrough. You're certainly not going to send it walkthrough pressing. You're not going to send it walkthrough grading. You're looking at probably a 2-year turnaround time.
So crazy.
It's I think 11 months wait just to get it pressed. Pressing with Goldin we've been doing pressing for years in-house for some of my comic books. So we will give you a 7-day turnaround time on the pressing. We will pay your grading fees up front as well. So there will be zero cost to the collector to get their book pressed and graded until it's sold. They have to consign it.
Yeah.
That's the catch, I guess.
Obviously, yeah. It's got.
But that's an obvious thing, right? You saw that coming. But so if you want your book pressed and graded, pressing with Goldin will be free of fees up front. Everything's deducted at the back end when we sell it, and it will be faster than you can possibly get it done anywhere else, unless you're pressing books yourself, which most people aren't. And it will be high quality, fully insured at every step of the process. We've proven that we can press and clean books for years, and Goldin's offering this to customers, and that is a definite differentiator, something that you can't get anywhere else. I'm sure Heritage use CCS like everybody else, and they're just as much a slave to the turnaround times as most people are. So that pressing with Goldin is going to be great. It's going to be a really fantastic service, and I'm really excited to launch that. That's not actually officially launched yet, but we are at the stage where we can start taking consignments through pressing with Goldin. So really happy to hear from anybody who has books they want to get pressed and graded. So yeah,
that's awesome. I love that. I also, was funny, like I started to see, we're just talking about creativity. And I don't, you don't have to say anything. It's funny. I started to see, like, we started to, like, on our end, again, like when you think about differentiators for content and whatnot, I started to see, and some of the guys that I work with that are really big into comics, this guy JJ, who is basically runs, him and Sean and some other people that are on our team run our comics vertical and like really manage that stuff. We started to go live during auctions because, like, I was like, look, again, from the media perspective, I was like, what about live commentary during really cool auctions? Like, you don't see that, if there's like something that's fast and quick. And so we started to do that, and the response was insane. So I understand creativity and finding something different, and it's fun to kind of do that stuff and try to, like, again, the word they use always is disruptive. I hate using the zeitgeist words or whatever, but to do something different and unique and see what happens. So I think that's fantastic. I love that kind of stuff. And the pressing thing, yeah, I mean, for those who don't know, pressing and grading, not only the turnaround time, but even if you do, like, I do some just for my own, just to have it, to get it back or whatever. But even if you fast track it, I've noticed as I've learned and gotten more into it, it gets incredibly expensive too. Like, that you weren't expecting. It's not like a standard, for those who don't know, it's not a standard rate. So if it's like a vintage Silver Age or gold, like, the price goes up big time when you go through like CGC and CCS and things like that. So it is, yeah, the turnaround time is incredibly rough. The prices get crazy on there. And so it's just it's a mission, especially if you're looking to flip. And so if you're looking to sell some stuff and you want to get it great, that's the way to go, is to go through the company and have that. We talked about, like, I always say, like, from a commerce perspective, the experience. So if you are a seller and, like, you have these, like, valuable books, there's nothing better than being able to, like, here, I'm going to ship them to you. You press them, grade them, let me know. We'll get them consigned, get them listed. And it's again, the ease of process is one of the most important things.
Let's say you have an invoice of 25 books. Well, I mean, if you're a dealer, not necessarily collectors, but if you're a dealer, it's what Sean and I used to do constantly. We would send probably one shipment to CGC a week. So that would be 4 invoices. So there's 100 books a week going from us to CGC, and it gradually grew from there. But let's say it was 100 a week. So that's 4 invoices. Let's say out of those 100 books, 4 or 5 are walkthrough. We always try to get some walkthroughs in every shipment because they're the ones that get opened first. So at CGC, you imagine this giant room full of boxes that need to be opened. If it has walk written on the side, those get opened first because they are priority. So you'd write walk on the side of the box, you'd know it get opened first. So we'd always sneak in some walkthroughs, right? So the way it works, on a walkthrough book, you're charged 3% of fair market value, and you determine what fair market value is on the invoice. But if they don't agree with you, they can push back and say, actually, this book is worth 50,000, not 30,000. So you're paying 3% of that. If you get it pressed by CCS, it used to be think 2% of fair market value for
Oh.
for those high-end books, but I think it might even be 3%. It's somewhere. It's a percentage. So I'm not sure. Do they have like a team of unicorns that tap dance on the really expensive books, and that's why it's a percent? It's no different to pressing a $10 book. I don't understand how
Yeah.
they can justify. I mean, I guess okay, if you're handling an Action 1 or a Detective 27 or something, you have to be a bit more careful. But it's no different. The process isn't any different.
Yeah.
So how can I mean, I guess they kind of have a not a monopoly, but they certainly are the only company that's known for doing this, and so they
Yes.
could set their price right. And Matt Nelson's a great guy, and he started this back in the 2000s, and he's the guy, right? He's the guy you go to. He's the guy that reversed the restoration of Superman 1. I mean, he's a restoration. It's so weird how people used to pay lots of money to get their books restored and look beautiful, and now
It's
people
so
are paying
crazy.
unrestored. So I'm definitely. I want to be very clear. CCS do amazing work.
Yeah. Yeah.
They do amazing work, and that's a testament to the fact that they have such a long waiting list for their stuff, and that CGC purchased them. So I'm the last thing I'm going to do today is put anyone down. I'm just
No, no,
pointing
no,
out
no.
facts. I'm just
Yeah,
pointing
it's
out
not what we're
facts.
about anyway. Yeah, of course.
I'm just pointing out facts. Like it seems a little crazy to give up a percentage of the book's value just to get it pressed. That just to me feels like, couldn't we squeeze a bit more out of these books? And if you're a dealer, that's really critical because
Yeah.
cash flow is critical. One of the bad stories I'll tell you when we next talk is at a time we ran out of money and we got a big collection that came in. We need to buy it or walk away from it, and we needed to find the money. And how we found it was pretty much well, it's a bad story. Teaser alert. Anyway, so if you're a dealer and you're sending 25 books to CGC and let's say 2 of them are walkthrough, that's a significant amount of upfront fees. It's over $1,000 probably just to get them pressed and graded. So the fact that pressing with Goldin gives you access to the same level of service but free of upfront fees means that's $1,000 you keep in your pocket to buy the next collection. And just for that reason alone, it's a differentiator and it's something that's going to get people excited. And
Oh, 100%.
Happy to talk about that.
I've been there. I mean, I've been there. Like I'm looking at my wall, and I have a couple of books that aren't super valuable, but I've been there where you're deciding, right? Because you're on CGC's site, and if people that are, if it's like one of those things, like if people that are on the site know, like you're clicking a book to get graded. So like, for example, I bought Raw just for my own personal collection. Nothing, it's not worth, it's like first Black Widow. It's like a 5.5. And I remember sending it in just to get it graded and come back so I could hang it up. Like nothing, again, this is not the most valuable book. It's probably worth like $1,000 at most, whatever. If that. And it's funny, like I remember being on there, and I think if I pressed it, and like it's known too, again, like with CGC, you're going to get a bump if you press it through CCS. Like it's almost like I've done ones without doing it and with doing it. And I know people, and you don't have to say anything, but I know people who will say like that are big time dealers that'll be like, I will never ever grade something at CGC or anywhere without pressing it, because no matter how good the book looks, they're usually going to give you a little bit of a bump, like it's like a mental thing. And I remember buying it at like, and I bought it pretty inexpensive, but buying it at like a 6.5 was the estimated grade. And I remember looking at it and I was fast tracking because I'm like, I don't want it's going on my wall. I'm not going to sell it. So it's fine. I'll eat the money, whatever. I remember like, for example, saying it was going to be like $110 to grade and turn around in like 2 weeks or whatever it was. And then if you pressing, it jumped to like 300. And I was like, for that point bump, I'm just not going to do it because I'm not going to sell it. And I know it probably would have been a 6 or 6.5 or not guaranteed. And I just remember that moment where you're like, let me just send it in. It's fine. Give it the 5.5 or the whatever. But that sucks though. Like to have that moment where you're like, because of that huge, and it's not, again, like you said, like it's not the margins or whatever. I could have still sold it and made like a little bit of money for what I paid for it, but it's not worth it. And so for me, I just was like, I had to make the decision to not get it pressed and clean and just kind of like, And I think I included another book in there that I wanted too. And I was like, I'm not paying like double for the whole. Another thing, if you do CGC and you do multiple books, whatever you do to one, you have to do to all in the container. At least my experience, and I could be wrong because I'm kind of a novice, but like I think I had 2 or 3 books in there, and then I pressed, CCS, and it like did it for all of them. And I was like, nah, I don't want all these ones pressed. So like so one of these is not even like a valuable book. I just want to kind of, again, to hang on the wall and whatever. So it is an interesting process and a learning thing for people that, are just getting into it now. And it's, there's trial and error to it. And so that's a huge thing. If you're selling, it's a huge, I can't understate it enough or overstate it enough. It's a huge thing to kind of have that through the company you're working with. So yeah, I can't say that enough, that's a huge asset for people.
The other consideration is also, let's say, an estate. So we've over the years, we've bought lots of collections from people whose someone's passed away, and they've discovered a collection, and often there's no money to pay for anything. There's no money to pay for a funeral. And they're like, okay, well, what can we sell here? What can we sell? So they go through the basement and they find the books in the basement, and they find our website and they contact us, and yeah, without the ability to give you this service for free up front, so there's no upfront cost, where's the money coming from for those people to grade or press the books? It could be significant. A good Silver Age collection could be, we've spent $10,000-$15,000 grading single collections, and we've bought some big collections.
Wow.
So we've been pressing for years, but so that fee hasn't been there. But if you're not in that position, if you're just a family and you're looking to get some money out of this collection, Goldin's pressing service will give you that access to the top tier, getting the maximum dollar out of your books, without having to spend a penny up front. And we'll also advance as well. So if we're confident that something's going to sell for $100,000, well, we'll advance you half of that. So
that's awesome.
People who really need help, at the time they really need it. I mean, we brought to market the front cover art for Showcase 24, and this guy had inherited from a relative. There were 3 siblings, and they all cherry picked. So everyone said, okay, what do we want? And nobody wanted the comics. And he said, well, I'll take comics. And so he got the comics and the comic art, and the comic art was a stack of stuff. There was some Silver Age Green Lantern pieces, but the real one was the Gil Kane cover art to Showcase 24 that sold for $108,000, and the guy lived in a trailer, and this was life-changing money for him.
Wow.
But the fact that Goldin could move quickly because we have the resources and we could advance money and get them out of trouble at the time they need it. So this can literally be a game changer for people who are facing like funeral costs and death taxes and all these other things that happen. Like, what do you do? What do you do? Like, yes, you should get all this stuff pressed and graded, but like the last thing on your mind is how do we find the 10 grand to get all this stuff done professionally? Oh, we'll just take whatever this local guy's going to offer us because he's got cash in an envelope. Well, there is a better way. And we're hoping that this will be a message that people hear when they really need to hear it, and we're here to help, because it's a business. I'm not going to make us sound like a charity, but it feels good when you find somebody in a situation and you can help. I mean, the definition of business really is solving someone's problems.
Exactly.
And the nice moments when you solve someone's problems when they really need the help make you feel like, you can sleep more soundly, like I did something good today. So I like it when things like that happen. I like being like the person who rescues somebody, like help somebody out when they need it.
When the two goals overlap, it's all, I mean, like you said, it's a business, but when you can do something really good at the same time, and it's a mutually beneficial thing where it's not just like, oh, hey, I'm getting this for, it's really nice. And that should be like the goal, I think, for a lot of people, should really to be symbiotic. And you know, and so I think that's always going to be the goal. And I wish there was more, was more the case, but obviously it's not in other areas. But yeah, I mean, I've kept you here for an hour and a half. I don't want to hold you anymore. I mean, this has been an absolute blast, and we really do have to do this more often because this has been amazing. And this is literally what we love to do, and the stories and what you guys are doing. And so hopefully we can do this more often. But this has been great. I've had
happy to do this anytime. Please check us out at goldin.co. Actually, now I think we also own goldin.com, which is a big deal. Like we suddenly, Ken Goldin, the founder, goes on TV quite a lot to talk about the business. And he's always had to say, it's not goldin.com, it's goldin.co. And we finally now own goldin.com. So you can just go to goldin.com and you'll find all our auctions, our weekly auctions, our marketplace, and the big elite sale in February, which launches on Valentine's Day. What's not to love about that?
Ooh.
Which features some of the books from Sean and I, our vault, our actual vault of comics.
We got to do a pre-show of that, because again, I also would love to go when you guys, like, I think we should do a pre-show of that, but we should also, when you guys do go live, like that's something that I would be, it would be fantastic to go live and cover, because I think it's super fun. I mean, even if you're not going to bid on it and you're not going to when we went live for one of the auctions recently, we had I think it was 3,000 people on there. Because again, you're watching history exchange hands, and it's just fun. And even if you can't, I'm not, for that one that was an AF 9.2, and you were talking about original art. They had the original art where Tony Stark gets the shrapnel in his heart in 39. So cool. And I'm I'll never have that, but it's super cool to see. And I think it's aspirational, it's fun, and it's part of history. And it's really cool to see these things. I love it. And so, yeah.
Well, next time I'm in Maine, we'll do a live stream of us opening the vault, and you can see some of the books.
Oh, I would love that.
Love that. That's a date.
Well, thank you so much, my friend. This has been a blast, and we should definitely do this again. But I will let you go because I don't want to take your entire day off you.
Come down to Goldin sometime and walk around the warehouse. That is quite a trip.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. I'm going to take you up on that for sure.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.